This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Chad Littlefield. Hello, Chad. Chad Littlefield is a speaker, facilitator, co-author of the book Pocket Guide to Facilitating Human Connections, and the co-founder of We. We works with organizations and designs, develops, and delivers experiential training and development programs that help the organizations build the relationships and the skills necessary to work better together. Chad holds a master's degree in learning, design, and technology, and his TEDx talks have been viewed by tens of thousands of people. I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. Welcome, Chad.
Hey, Kelly. Good to be with you.
All right. As you know, we ask our guest a couple of quirky questions to get to know them a little as individuals first. And so my first quirky question for you is, what actor would you want to play you in a movie?
So I was just down in Miami at training for Johnson & Johnson, and one of the participants came up to me on his phone. He had a picture of John Krasinski, who plays Jim in The Office. And so he felt like I looked similar to him. Felt like John's face was a little bit puffier, but I was honored by that. My wife and I just started rewatching The Office, and John Krasinski, I think, is, from what I can tell, is a good human being.
He seems like it, and he's a good actor too, so I'm sure he'd represent you well. Very cool, very cool. All right. The second quirky question is, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
I was got engaged. I proposed to my wife underwater while scuba diving.
No way!
Yeah. Had the dive master in Mexico. We went on a trip to Mexico the week before Christmas, and I had mentioned his name was Pepe, and I had mentioned to him that, I'm thinking about proposing to my wife under there, and Pepe just freaked out. He's like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me this. I've got the whole plan. I know what route we're going to take. We're going to go into this coral reef. I'll hide the ring under this conch shell, blah, 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 blah. And I think my friend has a camera, underwater camera. And so, sure enough, I had a vinyl sign printed out, and underwater rolled it out and had Kate look under the conch shell with a big giant fake ring, and rolled out, and the sign said, "Kate, you're my best friend and I love you. Will you marry me?"
How beautiful. I love a good engagement story. That's very, very cool. But it was a fakery. You eventually got it real.
Yeah. I was not about to bring that ring that I just felt like blowing my entire life savings on or something. It really wasn't that extensive, but yeah, it was a big, it was actually a napkin holder with a big diamond on the top, big silver ring.
Oh, so. Beautiful, beautiful. A smart man not to bring the real one down there.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So now let's transition a little bit, and I'd like to know what your story is. What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about people making connections?
Sure. So if anybody's ever seen the movie Patch Adams before, it was one with Robin Williams, throws on a clown nose to kind of promote the quality of life over the quantity of life. And his method, or his path to doing that, was fostering human connections with patients in a way that even the best top clinicians couldn't. And so there's somebody who could recite the textbook back to you, but they couldn't get that terminally ill patient to eat because they hadn't built a relationship of trust with that person. And so the movie's really funny, and it's Robin Williams. And anyway, I saw that movie sometime when I was in middle school or so, and I had my entire life figured out. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to go pre-med, had the path, got to Penn State, was on that track. And I got all the way to my second chemistry class in undergrad, and then said, oh my gosh, I do not want to be a doctor. I cannot be in school studying organic chemistry for the next 10 years. I'm out. And so, a bit of a good enough life crisis of, okay, whoa, re-envision what's going to happen. And what I found was I wasn't passionate about, or wasn't excited about holding a scalpel, but I was really excited about whatever that connection that Patch was able to make and what went into that. And so got really obsessed with studying that through psychology and a background in grad school in organizational development, and just got really fired up about what makes people tick. What is it that when you put two people together, allow them to create a relationship of trust in a way that would not happen just naturally or organically? So through that, found my way into an organization called World in Conversation, where 500 times I got to sit my job was sitting in a circle of 8 to 10 strangers for 90 minutes for the sole purpose of talking about stuff you're not supposed to talk about with a group of strangers, for the end goal of building empathy and understanding the other. And so when you get someone who's Black and someone who's white to sit down in a racial climate like this and have a conversation about what comes up for them when you see, when you turn on the news, how do you feel and how do you feel and what are your thoughts and what are your thoughts? And it was amazing just after 90 minutes seeing this bridge being built just through conversation. And so you have these huge systemic issues being attacked on an individual level just through conversation. And so even more fueled my passion for that connection there. So then sprinkled in there, worked at a team and leadership development center and taught a team building class at Penn State for a little while, and decided this is all awesome and I want to bring it to organizations at a wider level. And so I hopped out and started We.
Okay, so many things running through my head.
Yeah.
All right.
That was a long answer.
So in a way, you have become Patch Adams, just in a different kind of setting than a medical setting. Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I had told the Patch Adams story during a keynote that I was giving in Albuquerque just a couple months ago, and somebody came up to me and she just had this really deep, lovely presence about her, and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Thanks, Patch."
Nice.
Oh, thank you. That was the best testimonial that I could have received.
Lovely. And now, this World in Connection, is that right?
World in Conversation.
Conversation.
Yep.
So you mentioned that you came together and talked about things that people don't normally talk about. So you alluded to race.
Mm-hmm.
People
Yeah.
were talking about race. What other kinds of things did people talk about?
So there was a good chunk of dialogues that were focused on race relations, and then gender, cultural conflict. I was the head of global dialogues for a while, and so global dialogues would pair 4 people in the U.S. with 4 people in stereotypically peaceful nations like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Gaza, Iraq, Iran. And again, 90 minutes just on basically Skype on steroids, a teleconference system. And same idea, though, same concept, is have a conversation and seek understanding from the other and skip the headlines and skip the media. And so those were almost more of a 90-minute cultural exchange, because remember, being in conversations and talking about in the same dialogue what we have for lunch and neighbors' houses getting blown up by American drone strikes. And so really wide variety, but each piece, each thing that somebody would share just had this way of, I felt like every single dialogue, the 4 to 5 people in that one conversation on one side left with a slightly more sophisticated sophisticated view of millions and millions of people. And it was sparked for me by the power of asking really good questions and the power of listening to each other in a way that we don't usually. How many times when you read a newspaper article do we just unconsciously make a judgment rather than very rarely, I think, do we read news and become really ferociously curious and go seek more information or answers. We just take it at face value, and this is truth. This is my opinion about it. Right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, and move on.
Okay, that whole idea is fascinating to me, and I think I've often thought if we could just sit down and have conversations, people wouldn't have some of the issues that they have.
Yeah.
But so then you took some of those skills and applied it in the workplace as well. Is that kind of how we
Yeah.
works?
Yeah, so our mission is to create conversations that matter. And so that happens in a couple different ways, but one of the ways, my business partner, Will Wise, just published a book, Ask Powerful Questions. And the book is essentially the curriculum that we teach facilitators at World in Conversation. So every year, 60 or so new facilitators get trained in World in Conversation. It's a really intensive. There's two processes. One's a intensive 15-week process where they're getting trained as they're actually starting to facilitate these dialogues. And so they kind of get lesson one and then, okay, go facilitate your first dialogue. And they come back a lot more serious after that first conversation. They're like, okay, whoa, give me more. I need something. So that curriculum, those ideas though are, and when I say ideas, I'm talking about sharing your intention at the beginning of a meeting, establishing a relationship of trust with someone before you just launch into work with them. So this idea of connection before content, asking powerful questions that go beyond what our default questions, how are you, what do you do, where are you from, look like. And then how do you teach empathy is a really difficult thing. And so a tool for that, just one example of a tool for that in training is in a dialogue, having people describe the world as they see it. And so as a facilitator, there's two people in a dialogue and they're kind of going at each other. There's a cross of opinions. Might just pause and say, hey, super interesting conversation. Mike, I'm wondering if you can just describe the world as you think Susan sees it. And that this like shift happens where there's almost like this total pause because there was not even a consideration for what that might be like, because it's really easy to be absorbed in me as opposed to larger. So the pinpoint answer to your question, I got really passionate at some point, recognizing that there was millions and millions and millions of people going to work with, on paper, good jobs, right? They were well paying, they had their benefits, they're working 40 plus hours a week, and they hated it. And it wasn't fueling, and it drove me insane. And so when you look at, there's so much really awesome data coming out now that basically says people go to work for people, not for work. And they stay for people, and they quit their boss, and they stay for their colleague. And so there's, I wanted to bring to organizations focus on that and kind of concretize that as well, because it is a very invisible force that has a massive impact on organizations and costs organizations a lot of money. Because when somebody comes in and the climate of relationships aren't good, people leave. And when people leave, it costs an immense amount of money for an organization when that turnover happens.
So I believe in what you're saying because
Sure.
of who I am, I guess, in my experiences. But what happens within organizations that they go, okay, we've got to do better with the people piece of things, that have them call you or reach out to what you for the kind of things that you do for organizations?
Sure. And it might be fun too to turn on our analytical brains too and like toss in some science as well that might be interesting for folks. So things that people are saying is I'm having trouble communicating through the hierarchy. Our organization's really siloed out, and marketing's not talking to sales, not talking to engineering, and that's not working. Or we're having trouble scaling relationships as we grow. And so we worked with a couple fast growth tech startups, Typeform being one, where they're an amazing organization and they doubled in size in the span of about 8 months. And so there was this holy smokes, we used to know everybody's name. We used to have this kind of informal culture, and now we're walking by people and we don't know them. And how does this work? And at some point, it becomes unreasonable to know everyone. Like, Johnson & Johnson has 113,000 employees, and so you're not going to learn everybody's name. You're going to know everybody's name in your department, and there's lots of switching. And so, how do you build a culture? How do you not just build relationships, but how do you build a culture of people who are skilled at developing that relationship of trust, so that the assumption is that there will constantly be new people coming in, but there's a culture of, instead of asking how are you, asking upon meeting someone, what do you really care about? Instead of asking how was your weekend, asking what's a moment worth remembering from your weekend. Subtle shifts that are all, for me, opportunity costs. And so when I see that question asked, beyond the human impact side that excites me, I also see like that question could be worth $100, $500, $1,000, because it incrementally builds this relationship of trust between two people. And then a month down the line, when they're in different departments doing something else, they have that connection. And so when they need something from each other, it gets done more efficiently. It happens a whole lot quicker. And so, yeah, well, I get excited about the Patch Adams side of that relationship building. But I think as I've started a business, I've also learned and done a whole lot of research into what's the actual business implication of it.
Absolutely. Good.
So have you ever heard of Project Aristotle before? Google launched this. So Google, company that loves data. So they launched this massive study to quest, essentially, to find out what are the characteristics of the highest performing teams at Google.
Oh, yeah. I did read the article about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And what they found, of all the things that they measured, talent, skill, types of teams, methods of work, all of this, the number one characteristic that high performing teams shared was the PhD term for it was psychological safety, which is trust. It's, can I come into a room and can I be me, and can I let my ideas out in a way and trust that they'll be built up by people and not judged and torn apart in some way. And or if they're being torn apart, it's with really good intention. So really immeasurable, but Google's a pretty successful company. They've done okay for themselves.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple examples of questions you can ask to help build some of those relationships. But are there some more examples of things that you can do that leaders can do to help encourage it with their employees speaking up to them, and with their peers speaking to one another?
Yeah. So one really cool thing that happens is that most leaders know this or have experienced this, whether consciously or subconsciously, but what they do is very viral, sometimes more viral than what they say. And so, yeah, I could give you a list of questions, but that's not very useful because it might not fit the context. So one of the foundational tools in the book, Ask Powerful Questions, the bottom of this pyramid of skills is intention. And since I've had the lens going in, it's simple to understand, harder to it's not actually hard to implement. It's just not fully natural to implement. But the idea is, when you go into a meeting or a conversation or a coaching conversation, or you're firing someone, or whatever you're doing that involves people, begin right at the start with sharing your intention for what's about to happen. And so for me, I don't know that I actually really even practiced this when we hopped on the podcast, but I'll do it right now.
Okay.
So for me, my intention in hopping on and having a conversation with you today, Kelly, is one, to build a relationship and connect with you, but to also just share stories and examples that may help other leaders, just by listening, create a workplace that is worth showing up to. And so as I'm talking, there's lots of things that I could say, but I want to say the ones that will be useful to people.
Very cool. Very cool. And my intention,
Yeah.
and my intention is, I believe leaders play a really important role in the workplace, and that they influence a lot of what happens in that environment, and whether people are satisfied and fulfilled and being their best self at work. And so, if I can get people like you on the show to share some of those tools so that they can be better leaders and develop those richer relationships with people, I just think it makes for a better workplace. It makes for more successful organizations and just happier people. And we're whole people, whether we pretend to park things at the door that are personal, the personal spills over into business and the business spills over to personal. So, if we can give people tools that help them in doing that, that's what makes me happy. That brings me joy. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. There's like this very subtle shift, even in just us doing it, that now there's some direction. I feel aligned on where we're going. And so by sharing your intention for something, what you're doing is infusing purpose into work. And so the purpose of this meeting, you're also reducing the possibility for like story and assumptions to develop, especially in employees' mind, where, oh my gosh, I'm being called into my boss's office. There's fear connected with that, as opposed to that, if the boss shares an intention, hey, I want you to grow. There's some things you've done really great, and I have some feedback, and I'd love to share it with you. I understand your intention perfectly now going into that meeting. And so I would just encourage folks to try it the next time that they have a conversation, even if it's with their wife or their husband, brother, sister. Holidays are coming out. There are plenty of opportunities to share intention. And it just has an amazing shift. My wife and I are, Kate is her name, are really good friends with this other couple, Jeff and Janet, who are both psychologists, and they do couples counseling together. And so naturally,
wow.
When we get together for dinner, it's just really rich conversation. But one of the things that Jeff shared with me one time that I really loved, as Kate and I were first getting married, where when you get in those harder conversations, sit on the same side of the table. And he didn't mean that as a metaphor. He actually meant move your chair, get out of the booth, sit on literally the same side as a physical representation, that your intention most of the time is shared with people. And so it's this connecting. Your method about achieving that intention might be really, really different. But Kate and I have definitely made a practice in our own lives of trying to, and failing plenty of times, but trying to state our intention when we're going into a conversation that we know is hard, because most of the time it's, I want to figure this out and reach an agreement or arrangement that feels really fair and continue to love you. And so then we can travel through the messy waters of getting to that place, knowing though that like the entire time, no matter what she says, no matter what I say, our intention, our goal is out here.
Very good. Very good. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about was during your one TEDx talk, you talk about positive social risk. And that seems to fit into some of the conversation we're having here. So would you mind explaining what that is and maybe giving an example?
Sure. So the concept is, if you break it down to 3 words, positive, social, and risk. The positive part for me is your intention is positive. So it's not just a social risk. Social risk, I could go do a naked lap around my neighborhood, and that would not be a positive. It would be a social risk for sure, not a wise one. So aligning that intention. The social part has to do with people, and so I think most often, including myself, we tend to stay in our comfort zone as it relates to people, and so. It's why when I ask any group of people that I've ever facilitated with or spoke to, I ask them, what questions do we typically ask when we meet someone for the first time? And I get the same 4 answers every single time. It's, what do you do? Where are you from? What's your name? How are you? Every single time. that for me is like, holy smokes, that is a rut. That's a place that we find ourselves in. And so the risk part is when you step outside of that framework and you do something unusual and people aren't used to it, there is inherent risk in that failing. And so for me, I was sitting on a plane yesterday coming back from Miami, and this is actually a bad example because it's not a risk, because everybody's risk zone is very different, and so everybody's comfort zone is very different. And so there are some people who it is a total risk for them to call and order Domino's pizza because they hate talking on the phone and it's a stranger. And I've met and connected with these people. And so positive social risk for them might not be sitting on a plane and turning to the person next to them and asking the person, what inspired you to move to Asheville, North Carolina, as opposed to where are you from? That might be way not relevant for them. And so the point of the risk is to have a positive impact on somebody else and stretch yourself a little bit, because I think most often when we stretch is where, I don't know if you've ever seen that graphic, there's like your comfort zone and then an arrow outside of it, and where the magic happens is tends to be outside, and it's where we grow and learn. And it's much harder to grow and learn when we do the same thing that we've done over and over and over and over again. It's like, you know how to ride a bike, so when you ride a bike, you don't really learn how to ride a bike all that much more. At some point there's a plateau. So, but when you hop on a recumbent bike, and it's a little bit different, and you're playing with that. So, an example for me. So here's a really concrete example, and that there's actually the same keynote down in Albuquerque with the Mentoring Institute. And this guy came up to me and I'm young. And so most of the times when I'm speaking, facilitating, at least half the room, if not all of the room, is 10 years my senior. And so this guy came up to me and just started, he was like, I really love this. And like, boom, just started launching into advice about how I should start my talk with an experience, blah, blah, blah. And I just totally sat there and listened for 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes. So he just talk. And everything what he was encouraging me to start with some experience at the beginning of the keynote rather than words. And I'm thinking in my head, I did start with an experience, a really concrete one that got people up and moving. And so I'm like, okay, do I let this passively slide, or do I create a conversation that matters, that's gonna stick, that might really rattle him in some way, and not be just a comfortable professional conversation, but something real that made a difference in both of our lives. And so he finished, and I said, I kind of asked for his permission. Can I do something that might be really uncomfortable for you? He goes, sure. I said, were you at the beginning of the talk? And he was, no. And he came in 15 minutes late. And so he didn't see this. And I said, I know that I'm much younger than you. And all of the things that you said, you launched into this place of advice. There wasn't a single time in the last 10 minutes that you asked one question. You never asked one question. It was only statements. And I think oftentimes for me, walking through the world, I learn through asking questions, not through making statements. And so I'd love to push the next time you come up to somebody and you go to launch this, what might happen or how might the conversation change if you were to have started with, what was your intention in starting, or what did you think went really well, or what would you change, etc. So is this like confrontation with a stranger that might be seen as, I don't know if that's okay, or if I don't know if I have permission. And so it was a risk. I knew that might have flopped, and that guy might have been, peace out, see you later. And I didn't know the outcome of it. And I think with risk, we aren't sure what is going to happen.
So what happened with him after you made that suggestion?
He got really red to begin with. And he stopped me and he was like, Wow. Um, you're right. That is really uncomfortable for me to hear. And yet, right now, I think that was a kick in the butt that I needed because my relationship with my wife, every single conversation has circled around it, or she has said, "I'm not feeling heard. You never listen to me," etc. And so the feedback, for whatever reason, happened to hit him in a very real, personal place, and no one else in his life was giving him that
Very,
feedback.
very cool. Now, so is this something that you would recommend that that leaders use in their organizations? I don't know.
No, yeah, no, and again, so what I would recommend is taking positive social risks because I think there's immense power when and people are really present when they're taking a chance. That does not mean positive social risk does not mean be flippant with your interactions and have no intention and just flail through your day and give really harsh feedback to strangers. I would never, never, never recommend that someone do what is a positive social risk for me. I would recommend that they push their own boundaries. And so I was just working with an organization where the culture was conflict generally turned into resentment and ended up coming back as passive aggression. And so it would, somebody would have a little bout, and they would smile and nod, and then they'd go away. But the next time that person asks for something and they get an email, and this was a direct quote from, somebody told me literally, this person sent me an email after they did this. I couldn't believe it. And I got it on a Thursday and I was like, I don't think I'll be getting back to you until at least next Thursday. And so in company speak, that one moment probably cost that company about $200 to $300. That one single moment or interaction, just in lost time, lost productivity. And so what I would encourage is for leaders to steer into that curve and take a risk and point out the elephant in the room that they might be letting slip or slide, because there is a risk that it will not work out. And yet most of the time, if we are able to align our intentions in a positive place, I've had very few. The perceived risk is always higher than the actual risk. And so the perceived risk of sitting down next to somebody at a bus stop and asking, what is life teaching you right now, is, oh my gosh, this person's going to get up and stab me. But the actual risk, most of the time, is that that person is like, this is a little weird. But the possible benefit is that you spark this connection with a person that you otherwise may not have, and you learn something that you wouldn't have, and you created a moment that is worth remembering, etc. I'm definitely giving biased examples because I'm also not saying that positive social risks are asking deep questions at bus stops, because that's not the point. The point is that you're stretching yourself to reach someone in a way that you wouldn't otherwise.
Okay, cool. Very cool. So one of my favorite quotes from your talk, the one talk is, begin to see people as people with depth and stories, feelings, fears, and aspirations, and not as objects that move around, get in your way, or vehicles that serve your purposes. Do you remember saying that?
Thank
Hopefully,
you.
yeah. It was very well crafted.
Thank you.
So why are you passionate about this? Why, and what can leaders take away from that?
Hmm. So can I do a little bit of question judo, Kelly?
Okay.
So I'm curious, when you hear that quote, and the idea of seeing people as people, what is a moment in your own work and your own life where you feel like a shift was made from seeing somebody as an object to seeing somebody as a person with depth and fears and feelings and stories?
Uh, let's see. Well, I guess maybe the story I think I told you before. So when I was my second duty station in the military, I got put in charge of a project. We were responsible for processing travel claims, and we had an issue in that it was taking us too long to process travel claims. So, Navy regulations said so. These are travel claims when somebody transfers from one duty station into the duty station that we were at, or they went on a business trip, and they got reimbursed for expenses to cover that travel. And Navy regulations required that those be processed within 30 days. Well, it was taking us 45 days to do it, which is not just a problem because we're not in regulations, but it was causing heartache. It was causing problems to the sailors that were having to take either money out of their account or use credit cards. And oh, by the way, the credit card companies want to be paid every month, not every 6 weeks. So it was creating that kind of a hardship. And so when I got put in charge of this group, one of the challenges for me was I was new to the command, and I had never done the job that they were doing in processing these travel claims, and I hadn't been around long enough to know it. So we got individuals that were part of the process, and they had to solve the issue, and they did, and they solved it very successfully. We went from 45-day average to less than 10 days, and one of the things that really struck me in that, and I think I had assumed it, but I really saw it in action then, was that the employees that were involved weren't just doing this because they were assigned to a task force. They didn't like it any better than we did, that we were not in regulation and that we were causing hardship to these sailors. They wanted the problem solved. We didn't have to motivate them to solve it. They really cared, and they were ready to be asked, and they were ready to be involved. And so that was one of the earlier times in my career when I saw just what an impact employees want to make. And so after that, I felt like I became more collaborative. I didn't want to be the one with all the answers. Obviously, I didn't have any of the answers in that scenario, but the employees had that opportunity to give better answers than I would have given. And so I guess that was an early lesson to me about really giving people a chance to be involved and to solve issues because they want to. And just because you're the leader doesn't mean you have all the answers or the best answers. And I don't know if that.
No, it sounds like the quote that you liked that stuck out to you from the TEDx talk. You made happen by listening. You made happen by opening your ears. And I think oftentimes we create all of these thoughts and ideas about employees and their intentions and what they want or don't want or their work ethic or all of this stuff, but we don't very often ask them about any of that stuff. And so I think there's immense power. I think that automatically you can create depth to somebody if you just listen.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, so I know that a couple of things you talk about are asking powerful questions. We've talked about that, and leading by design. So can you talk? Maybe you've talked about the questions piece, but the leading by design. Talk about what that concept is and what it means to leaders.
Sure. So my background is in learning design and technology, and so there are all these design thinking models, and it's become fairly popular in the world, especially in textiles where you're creating and innovating lots. But one of the models that I really like that sticks out is Stanford's design school, the D school, has a model, super simple 5 steps, and pretty much every design thinking model has a similar step process, or at least overlapping. And it starts with, the creative process starts out expansive and then becomes reductive. And so it's generate lots of ideas, forget about quality, just go for quantity, and then you take out the knife and start slashing and end up at the one idea that you want to actually implement or act on. So that's one kind of concept. The other concept is every single process has an empathy step. It might not be called empathy, but it essentially means stand in your users' shoes, stand in your employees' shoes, and feel what the world would be like for them, and design a solution, design an experience that fits their needs, not fits what you think their needs are so much. And so to fully do that empathy, it requires you to talk to your employees and actually ask them and open that dialogue with them. And so for me, that section of leading by design is this idea of questioning your assumptions. It's okay that you make assumptions. It's really natural. It's actually quite helpful most of the time, because if we never made assumptions, you'd walk into a restaurant and you'd have to figure out, what do I do? Like, where do I sit? What are these bench? Look, what is? How do I interact with this? And so assumptions are it's a really helpful mental heuristic or shortcut. And we don't really have too much choice over it. We do have choice how we react to those assumptions. And so I can recognize, okay, I made this assumption that this employee is disconnected and they're ready to quit and they're not being productive and I'm just going to fire them. When I question that assumption, what I might find out is that there's one organization that a colleague worked with, and in the meeting that he was facilitating, it came out that one of his employees' mothers just passed away. They were really, really close. And the boss, the leader, was getting ready to fire this employee because she wasn't being productive in the last week or so, and her performance was way down. But he never talked to her. He had no idea that this was going on. And so for me, leading by design is part of that empathy phase. And that's part of the design cycle that when Apple goes to make the iPhone, they ask, do you really like these tiny plastic keys on the BlackBerry, or would it be better to have something that was a little bit more flexible? Or what if we just take away all the buttons and we just have one? And so those decisions are not being made because people are just brilliant at Apple. They are, lots of brilliant people, but they're also asking and testing lots. There's a funky, if you've ever seen Malcolm Gladwell's TED Talk on spaghetti sauce,
yes.
There's a slight caveat with that, which is when you ask people, what do you like or what do you want? It's a really terrible question because most of the time people don't know what they like or want. So when you ask people what type of spaghetti sauce do you want, most people say, I forget the exact specs, but most people say like thick and creamy or something. But when you give a taste test, most people choose thick, extra chunky vegetable. No one's going to articulate that, but when you experience something. And so what that might mean for a leader is, okay, I want to find out whether a weekly meeting cadence or a monthly meeting cadence is better for this group. And so it might say, hey, for quarter one, we're going to do a weekly meeting cadence. And for quarter two, we're going to do a monthly meeting cadence. And then at the start of Q3, we're going to just ask and find out which worked better, and we'll continue with that one. Or we'll talk about designing a blend. Maybe we'll do every 2 weeks, whatever. So there's that empathy phase. The next phase, which kind of overlaps with that example, is in most design thinking cycles, there's a stage of prototyping. And often, especially in tech, there's this idea of rapid prototyping. So a good expensive failure example is when Google came out with Google Glass. They did do a lot of rapid prototyping in the beginning. And so somebody had this idea of, oh my gosh, what if we made these glasses that would create blah, 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 blah. And so what they did is they took a hunk of clay and took off somebody's regular pair of glasses and said, okay, if it weighed about 25 grams on the back. So they weighed 25 grams of clay, stuck it to the back of a regular pair of glasses and said, no, that's too heavy. We need to cut that down. We need to cut that down. And so they just kind of made this like really low budget, under $100 prototype and let people try it out, got some feedback, and then iterated off of that. And so that idea as a leader of seeking feedback from your employees on these iterative cycles and knowing that, yes, part of my job is to make decisions and to come down and be firm in that and choose a place to stand. And especially now as grouchy millennials like me are not okay just traveling through work, waiting for something not okay, grinding through work in a cubicle, being unsatisfied, right? We're like demanding purpose and meaning in our work, and we probably want a beanbag chair or something too. And I think part of that is we want to be a part of the organization. We don't want to be a cog in a wheel.
Right.
And so leading by design, being able to access that by getting iterative feedback. And it doesn't mean involving the whole organization in a decision-making process, but again, it has to do with that listening piece. So that's a little snippet. That was probably a longer answer than you're looking for, leading by design. But.
Okay, all right. So if I could sum it up, you've talked about these different pieces, but it's all about um, questioning the assumptions and really testing things out and asking questions rather than just uh, I think some leaders are not necessarily, we don't, and I'm sure you've been guilty of this in the past too, is just kind of like going and not really thinking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it.
Yeah, so it's more in the same way that, and overall, it's applying really well-grounded research principles in design thinking and product design. So all the stuff that you have and own went through some really rigid or not rigid, rigorous process to create. They didn't just invent that idea or everything that you really like, probably. Plenty of stuff that I don't like that probably didn't go through that.
Yes, I have a printer like that right now. But anyways.
But seeing, instead of building products, you're building people.
Good.
And building up and developing people. And so applying a similar adapted framework to that for people.
Okay, excellent. So, one other thing that you're kind of famous for, I think, is the We Connect cards.
Yeah.
So could you explain what they are and how they work in helping people connect at work?
Sure. So deck them right here. It's a little square box, maybe 2.5 by 2.5 inches. And the deck of cards is 60 cards that have a question on one side and an action on the other. And the whole spark for creating them, I was facilitating a group once, and I invited people in the beginning. I wanted to see, just as an experiment, if I completely unstructured said pair up and get to know each other. I was really curious what would happen. And so I just did that. And then afterward, I asked them, okay, what did you do? How did you get to know each other? And looking around, there was like this awkwardness of like, when is this going to end? What do I do with my hands? I'm asking those stock 4 questions over, and I just asked myself, what is something that I could just put in between those two people and make that go better? And for me, it was what I prototyped out. I just really lo-fi printed on a lousy piece of paper, a bunch of questions that just came from my head, and stuck them in front of people, and didn't exercise that I had learned before in the world of experiential education, just a question swap. And it's like this miraculous thing for people, but it's really simple. You give everybody a question, and it could be topic related or meant to get to know you. And you have people pair up and ask each other those questions, listen to their answers, and then once they're done, swap cards and then go find somebody else to pair up with. So that's one thing that you can do in a card format, when questions are in a card format. And so we spent 2 years refining this list of 60 questions. And so when you see the 60 questions, they're really intentionally crafted. They're all really open-ended. They invite stories. They give people choice because they're color-coded. And so green cards tend to be a little bit more fun and light questions. But we stayed away from the stock icebreaker questions that are like, what superpower would you have, or something? And there's some merit in that, but we wanted to have questions that really actually accelerate a relationship of trust with someone. And these questions do that really well. And so I kind of created them for us to use individually, and people started saying like, these are really cool. Like, I would love to get these. And so we to fully test that idea, we launched them on Kickstarter a few years ago, and they did really well. And so right away, they hopped into 20 different countries. And since then, to be honest, as an entrepreneur, I've been really surprised at how much people have loved them. And to me, it's just confirmed that there is a need in this world for conversations that matter and not conversations that we have.
Yeah, yeah. So I had a similar kind of experience back in my corporate days. I had a friend who was trying out a business board game type of thing where there was a bunch of questions, and some of them were kind of work related, some of them were personal related, and it was with a team that I hadn't been working with very long, and just having those conversations that were not the four question type of things that everybody asked, that were a little deeper, a little more meaningful. I think that really did kind of start opening things up for us as a team. And so I could see where these questions would be wonderful to be used in a group setting where leaders are trying to build that trust that makes so much difference in the workplace.
Yeah, and it's tough to do that, I think, actually, because there are lots of ways to go wrong, I guess, in asking questions. But one of the accidental things that we discovered about We Connect Cards is you're talking about context, getting to know people better at work or at home. And it wasn't fully intentional, but the way that all the questions are structured, you can add context to the end of any question. So I just pulled out one at random, but what has been one of your favorite moments in life? And so you can add at work or at home or in fifth grade to the end of all those questions, and you change the whole deck afterward. And so if I get a sense that a corporate culture does have a really strong culture of keeping work separate from personal, I'm not going to go in there and conquistador that and force people to talk about personal. I'm going to meet them where they're at. And so it's a really easy thing to just add at work to, and for people to be able to share in that, maybe pushing their comfort zone, but at least within that comfortable framework.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So I do want to steal one of the questions from your deck and ask you, what is something that life is teaching you now?
Ooh, that is my favorite question from the deck, actually. Life is it's too long of a story to explain right now, but a person recently was struggling a journey of being an entrepreneur is always really up and really down, really up and really down. And so in one of those moments where I was just like, I am just tired. I'm really tired. Like I could go right now for just hopping into a job and just having a paycheck come every 2 weeks, and counting on that. And somebody recently came up to me, and it was in a fairly intense setting, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and I kind of shared a little bit of this struggle, and he said, be open. Be open. And normally my default would be to hear that advice and be like, that's fluffy, whatever. Like, that doesn't mean anything. What do I do with that? And yeah, in that moment, it was exactly what I needed to hear. I was trying to maintain and control everything and manufacture everything. And I wasn't just showing up with clients open to the possibility. I wasn't that I fully had this scarcity mentality, but rather than going into a meeting with a client, including this last trip to Miami with Johnson & Johnson, just going down there, and instead of saying, "Ooh, how can I get more work from Johnson & Johnson?" More. I just wondered, what if I'm just really open to being useful and to listening to people, and I had 3 conversations that were all related to future work that will happen in the next 6 months or so. And I just really set that intention aside. And so life is teaching me to be open and not have such a controlled looking for or listening for as I walk through the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. Nice. Well, my next to last question for you is in this journey that you've taken, uh, becoming like Patch Adams. What have been one or two pleasant surprises for you along the way?
Hmm. One recent one that comes to mind is a company that I really look out for. I mentioned them earlier, Typeform. Um, they I had begun a conversation with them. Their headquarters are based in Barcelona, but they're a very San Francisco esque company. And yeah, pleasant surprise was in the early October. Will and I got off a plane, off a train, off a bus, and we're in a plaza in Barcelona, um, about to go work with a company that I really admire. Right, it was probably have a really awesome survey data collection tool. It's really conversational. Anyway, user product, love it. And it was just this moment of like, wow, would this happen? Like, how in the world did I end up in this plaza in Barcelona? And it was just this moment of like, this is really cool that we live in a world that where I live in a world actually that where I have the privilege to create experiences like that. It's really cool. That's one that definitely crops up. Um, Another one I would say happens once a week. So now that there are thousands of these We Connect cards out in the world, once a week I'll get an email or a picture message or something of We Connect cards being used in this awesome spot. And so the one yesterday was a colleague went to the Virgin Islands to work with a bunch of senators and use them. So I took a table of that in the conference that she was facilitating. I was like, that's so cool. And then a couple weeks ago, had somebody send me one. She took them on an adventure backpacking trip because they're plastic and waterproof and all of that. And she had them laid. This picture was just, I'll send it to you afterward. Was amazing. It was the We Connect cards laid out on the like beautiful rocky terrain with a fire in the background and just these epic mountains in Arcadia in the background. And it was, for me, the joy of knowing that while I was eating a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, somebody was creating conversations that mattered because of this little deck that I decided to create. Well, it wasn't just me. It was a team of people, but yeah.
Very cool, very cool. All righty. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with the folks that are listening to the podcast? Maybe a question that I didn't ask that you wish I had.
Maybe just an invitation, thinking about, again, my intention of wanting to be useful, something that has been really useful for me, and maybe a more concrete way to operationalize the intention piece, or that intention advice, so-called, is creating a declaration. And warning, this is about to be grammatically awkward in a way, and yet it can be really powerful if you hop into it. And so declaration always begins with the phrase, I am the possibility that ... And so spend some time right after listening to this to write down and fill in that sentence for you. And so the idea is that before I walked into this room, before I came in here, a possibility did not exist in this space, and I literally brought it in with me. The same with you, Kelly. When you go into an organization to lead and create development or facilitate a conversation or meeting or present, you bring in a possibility that did not previously exist. And filling that sentence has a way of shaping the way that I actually show up. And so the one that I've been working off of right now is, I am the possibility that we can create a moment that is worth remembering. And so that it influences a lot of even the small moments in my life, the bigger moments for sure. And I'm facilitating with a group. I'm like, okay, how can I make this worth remembering to people? And that's constantly just this filter that I'm passing through. If I'm saying something, is it worth remembering? If I'm doing something, is it worth remembering? Mm-hmm. And so a example of how it bleeds out into my life outside of this, as well as I've made a habit of when I'm ordering food and somebody asks, what's the name for the order? I just kind of look at their name tag and I'll just say their name. And it's this very, very subtle thing, but it, again, disrupted. It's a social risk as well, but it just disrupts their pattern of they took 100 orders before my order, and everybody just said their name, and they just went about their day. But when somebody asks, what's the name for the order, and I say, Jessica, and they're like, what? They just have this smile, and it's very subtle and it's very small. They're not going to go back and tell their whole family that this happened, most likely. But in that moment, it made a tiny little difference. And so that times a million because of that filter, I think for me has definitely made my own life more full and better.
Lovely, 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 love it. I'm going to do it after I get off of the
Cool. I
Skype
can't
call.
see it.
Okay, so I just want to thank you, Chad, for your time and for sharing all this great information with our listeners. And if you send me a copy of that picture of the We Connect cards, I will include that with the
I will.
podcast notes. So
I
thanks
will.
again, Chad, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again. Go create moments worth remembering.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.